If you've been feeling lazy lately, good. You're experiencing something most people will never understand. You are on the verge of the moment that will make it all make sense. Your laziness is actually self-respect. That sudden lack of motivation you hate so much, it's not the end, it's actually a good sign. And you're about to find out why. Most people never get to this point. Most people stay half asleep. But there's a hidden side to this moment. And if you don't understand it, this exact phase can start to feel like the scariest, emptiest part of your life. Everyone thinks spiritual awakening is supposed to turn you into this supercharged, glowing, hyper-inspired version of yourself. You expect to wake up, feel on fire, and suddenly know exactly what to do with your life. But for a lot of people, the opposite happens. Everything that used to light you up suddenly feels dull, pointless, or even fake. That's because awakening doesn't arrive as a gentle glow. It hits more like an explosion on the inside, a blast that tears through old beliefs, old identities, old reasons for waking up in the morning. And just like any explosion, the moment after is not a party. It's shock. It's silence. It's standing in the middle of the debris of who you used to be, wondering why you feel so empty. This is the spiritual hangover effect, the aftershock. Your soul has just blown a hole through the life you outgrew, and now you're walking through the smoke, trying to remember who you are without all the roles you used to play. You're not lazy, you're stunned. You're not unmotivated, you're standing in the echo of everything that just collapsed. And here's where it gets dangerous. What you do in this aftershock decides whether this awakening becomes the best thing that ever happened to you, or the phase where you slowly start to give up on yourself. The ego collapses long before the new self rises. When people talk about spiritual awakening, they always focus on the big realizations, the insights, the shifts in awareness. But the very first thing that actually dies is the old identity you were carrying around. And when that identity dissolves, its motivations dissolve with it. The goals you used to chase stop making sense. The ambitions that once drove, you no longer feel alive, and the version of you who cared so much about proving something simply doesn't exist anymore. This is why you feel stuck. This is why everything feels heavy. Your spirit has quietly stepped out of the role you've been playing for years, but your mind is still trying to push you back into it. And the deeper truth is this: your soul will never fuel a life you've already outgrown. That's why motivation disappears before anything else. Not because you're failing, but because your inner world is shifting faster than your outer one. Most people never reach this point. They live their entire lives powered by personas they never question. But when you awaken, that persona starts to crack. You start seeing the difference between what you actually want and what you were conditioned to want. And as this gap widens, your energy pulls away from anything that belonged to the old self. You're not losing motivation, you're shedding an identity. And that kind of ego shedding always comes with fatigue. It's the body's way of saying, I can't keep pretending for you anymore. Only people who've awakened experience this level of collapse. This strange exhaustion that feels like a no rising from deep inside. But there's something else happening underneath this, something most people don't talk about. The exhaustion that comes after the illusion breaks. One of the deepest reasons you feel unmotivated after awakening is because you've seen through things that used to excite you. Fame, status, social approval, chasing power, competing with others. Once the illusion shatters, the world loses its shine for a moment. You're suddenly aware of how much of life is built on performance, pressure, and pretending. And when you see it clearly, it's impossible to unsee it. This creates a unique kind of exhaustion, existential fatigue, not depression, not laziness, just the heaviness that comes from realizing none of this was ever real. You outgrew the game at the exact moment you finally understood it. And when that happens, the world feels too loud, too empty, too predictable. Nothing feels meaningful because the things that used to motivate you weren't real motivations to begin with. What most people don't realize is that awakening comes with a quiet grief. Not grief for who you were, but grief for what you believed life was. You have to mourn the illusion before you can fall in love with the truth. This phase is uncomfortable because your old reality collapses long before the new one arrives. You're awake. But you haven't found what's worth waking up for yet. This fatigue doesn't mean you're lost. It means you're in the space between worlds. And something powerful begins to happen once you sit with that silence long enough. Why your pause is more spiritual than any hustle ever was. One of the biggest reasons you think something is wrong with you is because you were raised in a world that worships constant motion. You were conditioned to believe that if you're not producing, improving, or pushing yourself every second of the day, then you're falling behind. But that belief is the complete opposite of how real spiritual expansion works. Growth isn't linear, and it's definitely not glamorous. It comes in waves, intense surges followed by deep, necessary stillness. After awakening, that stillness arrives like a shock. Suddenly, you're not chasing anything, you're not striving for the next milestone, and for the first time in your life, you're not operating on pressure. And this creates a huge identity crisis because your entire life you've been told that slowing down means losing. But spiritually, slowing down means listening. It means your system is recalibrating, reorganizing itself, digesting everything you've just realized. There's this dangerous myth that true growth looks like being motivated every day, maintaining perfect routines, and constantly leveling up. But the truth is, spiritual growth includes chaos, collapse, rest, and even phases that look like regression. It's messy by design. You go through seasons of fire and seasons of silence. And the silence isn't a punishment, it's preparation. This is why your lack of motivation isn't a problem. It's part of your cycle. You can't be in perpetual expansion without burning yourself out. Everything in nature knows this intuitively. Forests regrow after going dormant, rivers shift direction after periods of stillness, and even stars go dark before they burst back to life. You're no different. Your spirit is pulling you inward, so your next chapter has room to form. Just remember this line because it will make everything click. If a seed judged itself during the dark, it would never blossom. You're in the soil phase, you're not failing, you're germinating. The emptiness you feel is the space where your real drive will grow. Before awakening, most of your motivation came from the outside. What people thought of you, how you compared to others, the expectations you were trying to live up to, the fear of falling behind. External pressure was the engine that kept you moving. You weren't driven, you were chased. But after awakening, those old motivators dissolve. The validation hits don't work anymore. The approval doesn't feel satisfying. Even the goals you once idolized feel strangely hollow. This is why everything feels empty right now. You're not lazy, you're unplugging from motivators that were never truly yours. And when those fall away, There's a temporary void before anything new rises to replace them. That void is uncomfortable, but it's sacred. It's the space where your real momentum begins building, the kind that comes from authenticity, not pressure right now. You're shifting from chasing results to aligning with purpose. But alignment takes more time to activate. It's quieter, slower, and more honest than external motivation. Instead of pushing yourself from the outside, you're waiting for something real to spark from the inside. And that spark hasn't ignited yet, which is why you feel stuck in this strange limbo. What you're feeling is a transition, not a collapse. You're in the waiting room between your old life and your true life. And that waiting room feels like nothingness because you're shedding what you thought you were supposed to be before discovering who you actually are. Your mind is panicking because it can't recognize this phase. But your soul is calm because it knows exactly what's happening. You're not running out of energy. You're gathering it. You're not losing your drive. You're redirecting it. And the moment your inner momentum finally switches on, everything that feels impossible right now will suddenly make sense. Your exhaustion isn't just yours. It's the weight the world refuses to carry. One of the strangest things that happens after a spiritual awakening is realizing that your emotional landscape is no longer just your own. Before awakening, you could move through life without noticing the subtle waves of energy people emit. But once you wake up, it's like the filters you didn't even know you had suddenly disappear. You start picking up on everything: the tension, the fear, the confusion, the heaviness beneath people's smiles. And the frustrating part is that none of it comes with a warning label. You just feel it. This is why your motivation disappears seemingly out of nowhere. It's not only because your personal life is shifting, it's because you're absorbing the emotional climate of the collective. And right now, the collective is tired. People are burnt out, but pretending they're fine. They're scared, but hiding behind distractions. They're overwhelmed, but masking it with busyness. That avoidance doesn't erase the energy, it displaces it. And awakened people, without meaning to, end up carrying what everyone else suppresses. You feel the emotional backlog that others refuse to face. You feel the pressure they bury, the anxiety they numb, the hopelessness they drown out with noise and routine. And because your spirit is more open, everything hits you with full intensity. Most people don't sense the rising tension in the collective until it collapses, but you feel the tremors long before anything breaks. This creates a strange emotional exhaustion, a heaviness that's hard to explain because it doesn't belong entirely to you. This is why the world feels louder than usual, why you can't tolerate drama, why empty conversations drain you instantly. You're not disconnecting from life, you're disconnecting from the illusions people use to escape life. And the more awake you are, the more intensely you feel what others avoid. Awakened people aren't tired of their own lives, they're tired of carrying what others refuse to confront. This isn't a weakness, it's a sign of energetic maturity. You're transmuting emotional density on a level most people aren't aware exists. You're not just healing yourself, you're helping clear the emotional fog that the world constantly recreates. But this process is draining, and unless you understand it, you'll mistake this collective fatigue for personal failure. You're not falling behind, you're connecting too deeply. And there's an even more powerful reason your motivation has disappeared. One that has everything to do with your destiny and nothing to do with exhaustion. Your drive didn't vanish. It was rerouted by something wiser than your mind. There comes a point in every deep awakening where your energy seems to shut down for no logical reason. Things you used to push for suddenly feel impossible to force. The career path you thought you wanted feels empty. The relationships you tried to hold onto feel mismatched, and all the goals you once placed on a pedestal start to lose their shine. It's not that you don't care, it's that something in you refuses to pour energy into anything inauthentic. This is your spirit stepping in. When a path isn't meant for you, your motivation is the first thing to disappear. It's the universe's most subtle but most powerful form of guidance. Instead of giving you a dramatic sign or a sudden revelation, it simply removes your desire to continue. You don't get the energy to chase what isn't aligned. You don't get the inspiration to pursue what was built on old wounds. And you definitely don't get spiritual support for building a life your higher self already knows will collapse. Think about how many times you tried to push yourself lately and nothing happened. Your body resisted, your mind rejected it, your spirit stayed silent. That's not failure, that's prevention. You're being blocked from investing years into something that would eventually drain or break you. This is a form of divine interference, but most people don't recognize it because it feels like stagnation instead of protection. Sometimes, the universe protects you by quieting the parts of you that would have chased the wrong future. When your old motivations die, you're supposed to feel lost. You're supposed to feel confused. You're supposed to sit in that empty space and have no idea what comes next. That confusion is the cocoon, that stillness is the protection. Your spirit is narrowing the path, removing irrelevant possibilities, and making sure you don't settle for things that match your old identity rather than your new one. What feels like a shutdown is actually a recalibration. Your system is rewiring itself toward a future that hasn't arrived yet. And until that future comes into view, your drive won't turn back on your soul, refuses to energize anything temporary or misaligned. You're not being punished, you're being preserved. Not everyone gets this kind of invisible guidance. Only people who are meant to walk a path of purpose get redirected this intensely. You're not done. You're not failing. You're being held still because the next chapter of your life is too important to rush toward blindly. And your spirit knows that if it didn't hide your motivation right now, you would try to rebuild a life that no longer fits who you're becoming. Stillness is not punishment. It's preparation disguised as emptiness. One of the most misunderstood phases of spiritual awakening is the moment when everything in you suddenly slows down. Your body becomes heavier, your mind becomes quieter, and even the smallest tasks feel like wading through water. It's easy to judge yourself for this. It's easy to assume you're losing momentum or losing passion. But what's actually happening is far more intentional and far more powerful than anything you've experienced before. During awakening, your soul becomes aware of timelines, choices, and directions that your conscious mind isn't ready to see yet. It knows exactly what you're moving toward, what you're growing into, and what will be required of you in the next chapter. And because of that, it forces you into a kind of spiritual stillness, a mandatory rest cycle, long before you understand why you need it. This is why you feel like your energy has vanished. It hasn't. It's being preserved, collected, protected. Picture standing at the beginning of a long stretch of road that requires strength you don't have yet. Instinctively, your soul slows you down so you can build the reserves you'll need later. You're not meant to be running right now. You're meant to be storing energy for something that actually matters. People get this wrong because they only see rest as something you do when you're allowed to. But awakening flips this. When you enter this phase, rest isn't optional, it's spiritual architecture. Your inner world is being rearranged, disconnected from what drains you, and rewired for what will empower you. That process is exhausting. You're not meant to be motivated during it. You're meant to be still enough for the shift to complete itself. This numb phase is a prelude to your next surge of purpose. That surge has already started forming beneath the surface. You just haven't caught up to it consciously. Think about how calm the air becomes before a storm breaks, or how the ocean pulls back before a massive wave rises. If you forced yourself to act right now, you'd burn out before the new chapter even began. Your soul knows that. That's why you've been slowed down, shut off, or pulled into stillness. It's not the end of your motivation. It's the origin point of a new kind you've never felt before. But to understand why this transformation feels so disorienting, you have to look at the identity forming underneath the surface. The emptiness you feel is the space being cleared for who you are becoming. Every major spiritual awakening comes with a rebirth, not metaphorical, but internal, psychological, and energetic. It's the moment where the old version of you dissolves, not because it was bad, but because it can't continue with you into your next chapter. And when that older identity begins to fade, it takes everything with it: your old habits, your old desires, your old dreams, your old motivations. This is why you feel lost right now. You're not void of motivation because you're unproductive or not trying hard enough. You're void of motivation because the identity that used to require it has vanished. You're trying to operate from a self that no longer exists, and the spiritual system simply won't fuel a dead version of you. The engine stops because the driver has changed right now. Your new identity is emerging in ways you can't fully articulate yet. It's subtle but undeniable. The things you used to tolerate suddenly drain you. The ambitions you once romanticized don't spark anything inside you. The relationships and roles that once defined you feel too small. You're shedding a skin you outgrew, even though the next layer hasn't fully arrived. And this creates a strange gap, a quiet, empty space where nothing feels solid. But this gap is where the new identity is built. You're forming new desires, new values, new priorities, and new spiritual alignment. But these pieces haven't assembled into a recognizable shape yet. You're in the blueprint phase of your becoming. Your new self is loading in the background, and your old self has stepped out. This in-between space is uncomfortable because humans are conditioned to attach themselves to narratives. When one narrative dissolves, it feels like losing your sense of direction. But in awakening, that loss is essential. A new identity cannot emerge while the old one is still running. Something has to collapse so something else can rise. This is why you're tired. This is why you feel empty. Your consciousness is letting go of an identity that was built on survival, pressure, approval, or an outdated sense of purpose. And you're transitioning toward a version of yourself powered by meaning, depth, and authenticity. That transition is enormous. It takes energy to dismantle the old structure and create the space for a new one to form. What you're experiencing right now isn't failure, it's rewriting. It's the deep internal shift where your soul prepares to step into a self that is more aligned than anything you've ever lived before. And when that new identity fully arrives, the motivation you've been missing doesn't just return. It returns cleaner, stronger, and completely aligned with your true path. The emptiness you fear is actually the clearing your destiny needs. There's a very specific moment on the spiritual path where the world stops speaking to you. The things you used to be passionate about don't move you anymore. The hobbies that once felt like your escape feel dull. Even the dreams you chased for years suddenly feel too small or too distant to care about. And when that happens, most people panic. They think something is broken inside them, that they're losing their spark, their identity, or their fire. But what's really happening is much more profound and much more meaningful than burnout or boredom. When nothing inspires you, it's because your spirit is pulling your energy back from everything that no longer matches the direction you're meant to grow into. It's a spiritual withdrawal. Your inner world begins removing your emotional attachment from your past so that your future has something to be built on. You're not disconnected, you're being unplugged from a chapter that's already ended on a soul level. This is why waking up feels like losing your way at first. You're transitioning between lives, but you're doing it while still living in the same body, surrounded by the same environment. You've shed a version of yourself that no longer serves you, but you haven't met the new version yet. That in-between space is where nothing feels interesting, everything feels flat, and the outside world feels strangely far away. But that emotional flatness is not a void, it's a reset. It's a spiritual cleaning of your internal landscape, so the next version of you has space to land. Old passions fade because they were built on outdated desires. Old ambitions dissolve because they were tied to a self you've already outgrown. And old motivations die because they weren't meant to carry you into the next phase of your evolution. You are being emptied on purpose. And that empty feeling is actually a magnet. It's pulling in a future you can't see yet, drawing in a direction that hasn't revealed itself, creating the vacuum necessary for genuine purpose to arrive. This is why the silence feels so deep. You're not losing your inspiration. You're clearing the ground for a transformation so big that your old life couldn't hold it. Remember this: when everything stops inspiring you, it's because your next chapter needs space to enter. Your motivation isn't gone. It's evolving into something unstoppable. One of the biggest misconceptions people have during a spiritual awakening is thinking that once their motivation disappears, it's gone for good. But what actually happens is far more powerful. The fire inside you does return, and when it does, it doesn't resemble the forced, frantic, survival-driven motivation you had before. It comes back as something deeper, cleaner, more grounded, and infinitely stronger. Before awakening, most of your drive came from the outside: expectations, pressure, comparison, the desire to prove something, the fear of being left behind. But after awakening, those sources of motivation become unusable. They simply don't work anymore. You can't force yourself to care about things that don't align with your soul. You can't push yourself through routines that drain you. You can't make yourself perform for goals that don't feel meaningful. That's why it feels like your fire has disappeared, when in reality, it's undergoing a complete transformation. Your motivation is not dying, it's being purified. As your identity shifts, your energy begins to reorganize itself, and you'll start to notice subtle changes. Ideas return that actually excite you, but in a quieter, more stable way. New interests begin forming, ones that feel more authentic than anything you cared about before. Random sparks of curiosity hit you out of nowhere, pulling you toward things you would have ignored in your old life. If you're still watching, I'd like to thank you for your attention. If you enjoyed the content and want to see more, please consider clicking the subscribe button. Your support is very appreciated. Feel free to share your experiences or thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, take care and subscribe for more insightful content.